November the 15th, a red letter day. Our first important party since we have been in this house. I got home early from the city. Lupin insisted on having a hired waiter and stood a half-dozen of champagne. I think this is an unnecessary expense, but Lupin said he'd had a piece of luck, having made £3 out of a private deal in the city. I hope he won't gamble in his new situation. The supper room looked so nice, and Carrie truly said we need not be ashamed of its being seen by Mr. Perkup, should he honour us by coming. I dressed early in case people should arrive punctually at 8 o'clock, and was much vexed to find my new dress trousers much too short. Lupin, who is getting beyond his position, found fault with my wearing ordinary boots instead of dress boots. I replied satirically, "My dear son, I have lived to be above that sort of thing." Lupin burst out laughing and said, "A man generally was above his boots." This may be funny, or it may not, but I was gratified to find he had not discovered the coral had come off one of my studs. The first arrival was Going, who, with his usual taste, greeted me with, "Hello, Pooter. Why, your trousers are too short." I simply said, "Very likely, and you will find my temper short also." He said, "That won't make your trousers longer, Juckins. You should get your missus to put a flounce on them." I wonder I waste my time entertaining his insulting observations in my diary. Carrie and I were rather startled at Daisy's appearance. She had a bright crimson dress on, cut very low in the neck. I do not think such a style modest. We had some music, and Lupin, who never left Daisy's side for a moment, raved over her singing of a song called Some Day. It seemed a pretty song, but she made such grimaces and sang, to my mind, so out of tune, I would not have asked her to sing again. But Lupin made her sing 4 songs right off, one after the other. At 10 o'clock, we went down to supper, and from the way Going and Cummings ate, you would have thought that they had not had a meal for a month. I told Carrie to keep something back in case Mr. Perkup should come by mere chance. Going annoyed me very much by filling a large tumbler of champagne and drinking it straight off. He repeated his action and made me fear our half-dozen of champagne would not last out. I tried to keep a bottle back, but Lupin got hold of it and took it to the side table with Daisy and Frank Mutler. We went upstairs, and the young fellows began skylarking. Carrie put a stop to that at once. I did not notice that Lupin and Frank had disappeared. I asked Mr. Watson, one of the Holloways, where they were, and he said, "It's a case of, ho, what a surprise." We were directed to form a circle, which we did. Watson then said, "I have much pleasure in introducing the celebrated Blondin donkey." Frank and Lupin then bounded into the room. Lupin had whitened his face like a clown, and Frank had tied round his waist a large hearth-rug. He was supposed to be the donkey, and he looked it. They indulged in a very noisy pantomime, and we were all shrieking with laughter. I turned round suddenly, and then I saw Mr. Perkup standing halfway in the door, he having arrived without our knowing it. I beckoned to Carrie, and we went up to him at once. He would not come right into the room. I apologized for the foolery, but Mr. Perkup said, "Oh, seems amusing." I could see that he was not a bit amused. Carrie and I took him downstairs, but the table was a wreck. There was not a glass of champagne left, not even a sandwich. Mr. Perkup said he required nothing, but would like a glass of seltzer or soda water. The last siphon was empty. Carrie said, "We've plenty of port wine left." Mr. Perkup said with a smile, "No, thank you. I really require nothing. But I am most pleased to see you and your husband in your own home. Good night, Mrs. Pooter. You will excuse my very short stay, I know." I went with him to his carriage, and he said, "Don't trouble to come to the office till 12 tomorrow." I felt despondent as I went back to the house, and I told Carrie I thought the party was a failure. Carrie said it was a great success, and insisted on my having some more port myself. I drank 2 glasses and felt much better, and we went into the drawing-room where they'd commenced dancing. Carrie and I had a little dance, which I said reminded me of old days. She said I was a spoony old thing. November 16. Woke about 20 times during the night with a terrible thirst. Finished off all the water in the bottle, as well as half that in the jug. I kept dreaming also that last night's party was a failure, and that a lot of Lowe people came without invitation, and kept chaffing and throwing things at Mr. Percup, till at last I was obliged to hide him in the box room, which we just discovered, with a bath towel over him. Seems absurd now, but it was painfully real in the dream. I had the same dream about a dozen times. Carrie annoyed me by saying, "You know champagne never agrees with you." I told her I had only a couple of glasses of it, having kept myself entirely to port. November the 19th, Sunday. A delightfully quiet day. In the afternoon, Lupin was off to spend the rest of the day with the Mutlars. He departed in the best of spirits, and Carrie said, well, one advantage of Lupin's engagement with Daisy is that the boy seems happy all day long. That quite reconciles me to what I must confess seems an imprudent engagement. Carrie and I talked the matter over during the evening, and agreed that it did not always follow that an early engagement meant an unhappy marriage. Dear Carrie reminded me that we married early, and with the exception of a few trivial misunderstandings, we never had a really serious word. I could not help thinking that half the pleasures of life were derived from the little struggles and small privations that one had to endure at the beginning of one's married life. Such struggles were generally occasioned by want of means, and often helped to make loving couples stand together all the firmer. Carrie said I had expressed myself wonderfully well, and that I was quite a philosopher. We're all vain at times, and I must confess I felt flattered by Carrie's little compliment. I don't pretend to be able to express myself in fine language, but I feel I have the power of expressing my thoughts with simplicity and lucidness. About 9 o'clock, to our surprise, Lupin entered, with a wild, reckless look, and in a hollow voice, which I must say seemed rather theatrical, said, "Have you any brandy?" I said, "No, but here is some whisky." Lupin drank off nearly a wine-glassful without water, to my horror. We all three sat reading in silence till 10, when Carrie and I rose to go to bed. Carrie said to Lupin, "I hope Daisy is well?" Lupin, with a forced, careless air that he must have picked up from the Holloway comedians, replied, "Oh, Daisy? You mean Miss Mutlar? I don't know whether she's well or not, but please, never to mention her name again in my presence." November the 22nd. Going and Cummings dropped in during the evening. Lupin also came in, bringing his friend Mr. Berwin Fosselton, one of the Holloway comedians, who was at our party the other night, and who cracked our little round table. Happy to say Daisy Mutlar was never referred to. The conversation was almost entirely monopolized by the young fellow Fosselton, who not only looked rather like Mr. Irving, but seemed to imagine that he was the celebrated actor. I must say he gave some capital imitations of him. As he showed no sign of moving at supper time, I said, "If you'd like to stay, Mr. Fosselton, for our usual crust, pray do." He replied, "Oh, thanks, but please call me Berwin Fosselton. It is a double name. There are lots of Fosseltons, but please call me Berwin Fosselton." November 23rd. In the evening, Cummings came early. Going came a little later and brought, without asking permission, a fat and I think very vulgar-looking man named Padge, who appeared to be all moustache. Going never attempted any apology to either of us, but said Padge wanted to see the Irving business, to which Padge said, "That's right," and that's about all he did say during the entire evening. Lupin came in and seemed in much better spirits. He had prepared a bit of a surprise. Mr. Berwin Fosselton had come in with him, but had gone upstairs to get ready. In half an hour, Lupin retired from the parlour, and returning in a few minutes, announced, "Mr. Henry Irving." I must say we were all astounded. I never saw such a resemblance. It was astonishing. The only person who did not appear interested was the man Padge, who'd got the best armchair and was puffing away at a foul pipe into the fireplace. During the supper, Mr. Berwin Fosselton again monopolized the conversation with his Irving talk, and both Carrie and I came to the conclusion one can have even too much imitation of Irving. After supper, Mr. Berwin Fosselton got a little too boisterous over his Irving imitation, and suddenly seizing Going by the collar of his coat, dug his thumbnail, accidentally of course, into Going's neck and took a piece of flesh out. Going was rightly annoyed. But that man Padge, who, having declined our modest supper in order that he should not lose his comfortable chair, burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter at the little misadventure. I was so annoyed at the conduct of Padge, I said, "I suppose you would have laughed if he'd poked Mr. Going's eyes out." To which Padge replied, "That's right," and laughed more than ever. I think perhaps the greatest surprise was when we broke up. For Mr. Bowen Fosselton said, "Good night, Mr. Pooter. I'm glad you liked the imitation. I'll bring the other make-up tomorrow night." November 24th. Had it not been for this Daisy Mutler business, I would have written to Mr. Bowen Fosselton and told him that I should be out this evening. But I fancy he's the sort of young man who would come all the same. Dear old Cummings came in the evening, but Going sent round a little note saying he hoped I would excuse him not turning up, which rather amused me. He added that his neck was still painful. Of course, Bowen Fosselton came, but Lupin never turned up. And imagine my utter disgust when that man Padge actually came again, and not even accompanied by Going. I was exasperated. I said, "Mr. Padge, this is a surprise." Mr. Padge said, "That's right," and took the best chair again, from which he never moved the whole evening. November 25th. On returning home at the usual hour on Saturday afternoon, I met near the archway Daisy Mutler. My heart gave a leap. I bowed rather stiffly, but she affected not to have seen me. Very much annoyed in the evening by the laundress sending home an odd sock. Sarah said she sent 2 pairs, and the laundress declared only 1.5 pairs were sent. I spoke to Carrie about it, but she rather testily replied, "I'm tired of speaking to her. You'd better go and speak to her yourself. She's outside." I did so, but the laundress declared that only an odd sock was sent. Going passed into the passage at this time and was rude enough to listen to the conversation, and interrupting said, "Don't waste the odd sock, old man. Do an act of charity and give it to some poor man with only one leg." The laundress giggled like an idiot. When I returned to the parlour, Going was retailing his idiotic joke about the odd sock, and Carrie was roaring with laughter. I suppose I'm losing my sense of humour. I spoke my mind pretty freely about Padge. Going said he'd met him only once before that evening. He'd been introduced by a friend, and as he, Padge, had stood a good dinner, Going wished to show him some little return. Upon my word, Going's coolness surpasses all belief. Lupin came in before I could reply, and Going, unfortunately, inquired after Daisy Mutler. Lupin shouted, "Mind your own business, sir," and bounced out of the room, slamming the door. The remainder of the night was Daisy Mutler, oh, Daisy Mutler, oh, Daisy Mutler. Oh, dear. December 19th. The annual invitation came to spend Christmas with Carrie's mother, the usual family festive gathering to which we always look forward. Lupin declined to go. I was astounded, and expressed my surprise and disgust. Lupin then obliged us with the following radical speech. "I hate a family gathering at Christmas. What does it mean? Why, someone says, 'Ah, we miss poor Uncle James, who was here last year,' and we all begin to snivel. Someone else says, 'It's 2 years since poor Aunt Liz used to sit in that corner.' Then we all begin to snivel again. And then another gloomy relation says, 'Ah, I wonder whose turn it will be next.' And we all snivel again and proceed to eat and drink too much. And they don't discover until I get up that we've been seated 13 at dinner.